I am Nick Stanley. It is my pleasure to be hosting this event tonight for CDM. I have done this talk at CDM a number of years in a row now, and our firm works with a number of CDM families. It's one of my favorite events of the year, to be honest, just because CDM families are you're motivated, but in a healthy degree, and you all want what's best for your kids, and you tend to ask great questions. And we saw some really strong pointed questions in the registration query there, and I wanted to make sure everybody knows that their questions will be answered tonight. We're going to do the way this is going to work. We're going to do a brief overview of college admissions, how it normally works in terms of how tests figure into that process. Then we'll go grade by grade in that how things have changed for the 12th graders, and then what you can be looking ahead to if you're in the 11th grade or the 10th grade. And then we've got a few tips for our 9th graders as well, and a preview of what's to come down the line for them. And I'm just going to take one quick second to check my chat box here to just make sure no one's having any technical difficulties. Okay, looking good. And then yes, we are going to be discussing this. We're getting the same questions here. We will be discussing test optional schools, but now that I'm doing these 2 or 3 of these webinars for various high schools every week, I have found it's much more helpful to put the big picture. Let's give everybody the big picture first, and then we'll talk about how things are, the particular changes for this year and the coming years. I think that helps people to understand where those college admissions officers are coming from. And then the most popular question that we saw before we get into the presentation was, will these tests be relevant for our current 11th and 10th graders? I do want to jump onto that one right away because so many people ask that question, and it's a very valid question. The answer is yes, they will be relevant to your admissions decisions. That's it. The answer is yes. And we will get into the details as we go grade by grade, but that is the very short answer. All right. Now, let's get into this. I did want to start this off with a video, and it mentions a tip for dealing with anxiety. Now, in past years, I'm a big fan of this technique and this research that comes out of Harvard. It came across my desk as a technique to help performance in pressure-filled situations. And their actual experiments, they used SAT math sections to see if this technique would help, and it very much did so. And so we grabbed a hold of this, although right now this is a little extra meaning because so many people are dealing with different forms of anxiety, whether that's because you're in a distance learning situation, or because your sport has been canceled, or you're not able to do certain things that you would like to do. All this leads to anxiety. And so I thought we would kick the session off tonight with this video because I think it's more relevant than ever before. So I am going to launch that, and then we will get into all that good college admission stuff.
You might want to try saying 3 little words to yourself. I am excited.
In these studies, we had people say, I'm excited. And when people said that, when they reappraised their anxiety as excitement, they actually gave better public speeches, they sang better in our karaoke lounge, and they did better on math tasks.
It sounds too simple to be true, but what you're really doing is getting yourself out of a threat mindset where you're focused on all the things that could go wrong, and into an opportunity mindset where you're thinking about all the good things that could happen if you do well. They weren't actually less anxious, right? They just did better.
That's right. So anxiety, the arousal stays high, and you stay in that high arousal state and just flip from negative to positive, from anxiety to excitement.
The reason is anxiety and excitement have a lot more in common than you might think. They're both aroused emotions. In both, the heart beats faster, cortisol surges, and the body prepares for action. It's much easier to get from anxiety to excitement than it is from anxiety to calm. In Brooks' study, after saying, "I'm excited," people sang 17% better, were 17% more persuasive at speaking, and did 22% better on a math test than people who said nothing or tried to remain calm.
All right, now a couple things I want to highlight from this video. Now, this is really the key here with this particular technique, is that it is much easier physiologically to get from anxiety to excitement rather than from anxiety to calm. Once that anxiousness starts rising up, especially in a high performance situation, it is very difficult to calm yourself down. And I know as parents, often our number one instinct is to say, calm down. What we should be focusing on, though, is trying to get from anxiety to excitement. And when we look at the results of what happens when students approach this way, they really are, I mean, this is an easy win-win. It takes a small amount of time and energy, and yet it does have quite a bit of a performance boost in a number of different areas. And if you really want to supercharge this for a school-based situation, whether that is an AP exam or a SAT or ACT exam or a test in school, we have seen this technique be extremely successful. And rather than just saying, "I am excited," and just saying those words about whatever the situation is, take 2 minutes to write freehand about all the reasons that you are excited to engage in that particular activity. And it does not matter if you actually are excited or not. Most of the time that somebody uses this technique, they're actually not looking forward to that particular situation. It will still work. Your performance will still be improved. Just focus on the things that could go well as a result of doing well on that particular exam or performance situation. And again, this is a great trick. Doesn't cost anybody anything except 2 minutes of your time, and it is good for mental health. And it will also boost your scores on the SAT and the ACT, and it can be used in a variety of areas. It's just a win-win all around. Oh, and it looks like a few of you were unable to hear the audio, but only 2 people mentioned that. That might have been on the other end. I will make sure that the video is connected in the follow-up email that goes out, so anybody's able to view that at home on their own. All right, let's jump into an overview of college admissions, and this is really where we get into the nuts and bolts of how college admissions normally works, and then we'll talk about how it's a little bit different for our current 12th graders. All right. So USC, NYU, Boston, they receive more than 60,000 applications every single year. And that is the #1 driving factor why the SAT and ACT actually rise in importance with each successive admissions year or admission cycle rather than decrease. And this is interesting because most college admissions officers know that the SAT and the ACT are not great insights into any particular student's potential for the future, their intelligence, what it is they have to offer to the school. They don't look at these tests as good measurements of any of those things. All of that exists in the imagination of popular culture out there. But the way college admissions officers use them, they really have one function. It's that you have GPAs from thousands of different educational institutions around the world, right? I mean, this poor college admissions officer here, and that, again, that could be at any selective school, is being asked to compare the high school GPAs, which they know is a good marker of somebody's academic potential. They're being asked to compare those GPAs from high schools in Southern California to Vermont, and then to high schools in China and high schools in London. I mean, and there's no way that admissions officer could know every single high school that is out there. And when you're dealing with the kind of numbers that some of these schools are, where they're in the tens of thousands of applications, they really need one measurement where everyone did the same thing to help put those GPAs in context. And so this is where it gets a little confusing to people, because sometimes they think admissions to a particular school is down to their score or their GPA. Neither one of those things is true. There is no GPA or score that's going to guarantee admission to a particular selective college. And on the upside, there's no particular GPA and test score that's going to absolutely rule you out from a particular selective college. But they use those things together to try to get an insight into who that student is. And then they add all those other pieces, the recommendation letters, the personal statements, what you have done with your free time over the last 4 years in your activities list. Then we've got supplemental question answers, all those different tools that they have. They try to paint a picture of a student that way. Okay, so let's look, we had this chance to talk to a number of admissions officers at these various schools and say, how long would you like to have per student for each application if you were really going to dig in there to paint that coherent narrative of each student? And they said they would love to have 2 hours per application. Now, if they took 2 hours per application at a school like USC, NYU, Boston, where they have 60,000 applications, it would take them to put together one freshman class approximately 63 years. Obviously, that is not going to work when they have a matter of 3 to 4 months to put together one freshman class. And of course, even with their staff of 30, it takes way too long to put together that freshman class if they were going to spend the requisite 2 hours. And so all this is just to try to put this idea in context. When you get to these levels, these numbers of applications, that is what is pushing more and more emphasis onto SAT and ACT, even though a number of college admissions officers readily admit they wish they could put a little less emphasis on those test scores, because again, they don't think they're great insights into who a kid is. It's just, they want it to be one tool amongst many to look at each individual student. But I do spend a little extra time on this point because I think it's very important for students to know. One thing that we have seen is when they understand that the SAT or the ACT are not out and out intelligence tests, they're not measurements of what they're going to be capable of achieving in college, we see a couple of things. One, mental health improves, and that's a good thing. They're less freaked out by the test. Two, as a result of being less freaked out, as a result of feeling less judged by the exam and the results of the exam, they perform better on the test just by changing their frame of reference for that SAT or ACT. And so anytime we can boost mental health and boost a kid's performance just by explaining to them how these tests are really used, that gets me excited. That's information I want out in the communities that we work in. Okay, so let's dig in a little bit to a school like USC. And this information comes directly from a high school in Orange County that this is over a couple year period, and there's students that applied to USC. We used an unweighted GPA. So we have GPA going up and down on this axis, on the vertical axis. So the unweighted means the GPA is capped at 4.0. And fun fact, any selective college, those admissions officers can click through a variety of lenses to see how your GPA looks from various viewpoints. And those might include your dropping, let's pull out freshman grades. Let's throw the freshman grades back in. Let's see these grades weighted and unweighted. Let's see them unweighted, but throw out the freshman grades or throw out first semester of senior year. They have different, a number of different ways to look at your grades to, again, to try to get more of a rounded viewpoint on who that student is. And part of that is that grades become more important in school. They're weighted more heavily in the process with each successive year of high school. And I think that's a great thing, because a number of students, they're just figuring things out freshman year. Some of us, like me, when I was in high school, we were still figuring it out during sophomore year in high school. Hopefully by junior year, or at least by senior year, you are trending upwards and things are starting to click and you're achieving grades that you really are that show what you're capable of. Okay, now on this horizontal axis down here, these are interchangeable SAT and ACT scores. So all the way up here at the top, we have a 36 on the ACT or a 1600 on the SAT. Those would be perfect scores on those tests. And then if we move all the way down near that 2.0, we've got a 12 and a 660. Most scores, if you're going to be applying to a selective college, do not fall under a 12 or a 660. And we did not have any data for students like that were applying to USC, so they are not included in this graph. Now, one thing I would like to bring in here, there were some questions about, can you tell me about the differences between the SAT and the ACT? And I wanted, this is a good chance to pull up some free resources for everyone. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the specific differences between SAT and ACT, and here's why. Number one, it would bore most of you to death, and we certainly don't want that. Number two, it's much easier to take in that information by reading it rather than listening to me. So what I'm going to encourage you to do, and I'm going to put this in the chat box for everyone to see, I've got a link here for you. There are 2 flyers that I would normally pass out in person, except in this case, I am going to put that in the chat box for everybody, and everyone should be able to see that link. Again, there's just a number of free resources on this page. One of them is this SAT versus ACT comparison chart. If you click on that, it will open, and there are 2 sides to the flyer. This breaks down these tests in as much detail as you want. It's all right there, lots of great information for you. And then the other one that is very popular is finding the right fit, and that shows students and parents the typical SAT, ACT score ranges at the 100 most popular colleges. And then we've also got some timeline information and some other great free stuff for you there. All right, I'm going to go back to our slide here. And whip back to where we were. All right. Okay, so let's dig into this graph a little bit deeper. The red dots were not admitted to USC on here. They applied, their application was declined. Green dots applied and they were admitted, and they matriculated to USC. Then we've got our blue dots. They were also admitted, but they matriculated to a different college. So they turned down USC's offer of acceptance. Okay, now at any given selective college, there's a range where we find the typical competitive applicants. And so you can see between these 2 yellow marks, it's about a 50-50 breakdown between our yeses and nos from USC's end. And that competitive range changes for each and every college. And that's why on that second flyer I mentioned, we let you know what that range is for the 100 top most popular schools, because again, it's different at each one. And I know at CDM, your counselors encourage this. We encourage this as well, which is to have a balanced college list when you apply. And balance just means you're going to apply to 3 different tranches of colleges, right? We're going to have our reaches, which is where our scores and grades maybe are a little below the typical applicant. That's fine. Throw your hat into the ring at a few of those colleges. You never know what's going to happen, especially in a COVID year where you may get some opportunities at some selective colleges that in other years you would not have. It'd be nice if something was better as a result of COVID, right? The second tranche is going to be schools where you're right in the middle of those competitive applicants. And so again, that would be right in between these 2 yellow marks. And we want to have a number of schools. Those are target colleges. That's where it's going to be a 50-50 at any of those colleges. And then we want to have a few likely schools. Excuse me here, this is my second hour-long webinar of the evening, and so my throat is a little dry. That third tranche is going to be likely schools where your scores are ahead of the typical applicant at that college, and so you've got a very high chance of getting into that college. And I don't really like to use the word the safety for those colleges because it has a negative connotation, like, well, if everything else goes wrong, at least I've got my safety schools. I think when things don't go as planned and you end up on one of those schools, you feel a little bit let down, a little bit like you failed. Likely schools is a much better term because there's you should be excited about those schools. Get excited about those schools that are likely to admit you, because not only are they likely to admit you, they're likely to give you scholarship money. And we're going to get into that in a second. Okay, so let's look at 3 students. We've got a student who's behind that competitive range, a student that's right in the middle of the competitive range, and then a student that's above. Their scores and grades are above that competitive range. Now you're going to notice if you're behind the range, if your scores and grades are typically lower than the normal competitive applicant there's a lot of red. This is where the denials live. But they're not all red, right? You do see a smattering of green dots out here. There are some in some very low score, low GPA places. There are a number of reasons for this. There are some more cynical reasons, like you might be a family that could potentially donate a building to the college one day. They do make exceptions for those students. You might be an exceptional athlete, and that certainly goes a long ways at a school like USC, and contrary to popular belief, it goes a long ways at the Ivy League schools as well. Remember, Ivy League is not any sort of academic title. It's a sports league, and those schools actually really value their sports. So if you are a strong athlete with grades and scores that could be competitive, that's a good opportunity there if that culture fits and their level of athletics fits. Take a look at those as well. And then back here, we also just have really captivating stories. And one of the things I really like that the UCs do, they implemented this nearly a decade ago with their holistic admissions policy, is that they wanted every single application to get read. And at a school like UCLA, they actually receive north of 100,000 applications every year. They're truly mind-boggling numbers. The students that aren't making the cut in terms of grades and scores, those applications are sent out to outside readers who, when they find a diamond in the rough, a story that is really captivating for a particular kid, they send it back to the main admissions team to make sure they get a full read and an equal opportunity chance at admission to those UC schools. And so that can account for some of these that are behind the curve. I will say though, if your normal academic stats are behind the curve, you do need to have something that's very compelling in order to pull your application up. I recently, this was 6 months ago, had a parent ask me, their son was really into fishing, and they thought, is fishing going to be the thing that pulls him ahead and makes him stand out in the application process? Maybe if he can write if he has a great story about fishing and how it's changed him as a person and help him to grow and see the world in a different place, maybe he could write an essay about that. But just being into fishing by itself is not something that's really compelling. In contrast, we've seen plenty of parents, they say, hey, my student is a nationally renowned violinist. Is that going to make them stand out? Yeah, something like that, a talent that really stands out on a large scale, that does change the equation. And so you really needs to be something special that pulls your application up. Now, there are second case when we're right here in the middle of the zone. This is where all the qualitative pieces of your application begin to come into play. Certainly the personal statement that you write and those supplemental essay questions, that's going to be the biggest driver beyond just your GPA, course rigor, and your SAT or ACT score. Sorry, a question came in there that caught my attention. We will get to that one a little bit later, and I will email people if you have a specific question. Hey, would my particular activity work to pull my application up? I will email people answers to those questions, or someone that's part of the team will. I do, for the purposes of the webinar though, want to stick to universal answers that's going to apply to the majority of families on this call, because We don't want 99 people sitting there twiddling their thumbs while we have a one-on-one counseling session for one particular student. And then let's talk about this third scenario where you're ahead of the curve. And again, this is a great place to be. So apply to a few colleges where your scores and grades are above what that school typically sees. Now you'll notice here, we've got a lot of blue dots. Again, that means they were accepted by USC, but they chose to go somewhere else. Well, USC doesn't like that for a number of reasons. One, when they offer admission, they can only offer so many spots. So they want to have a good sense of how many students are going to come back and say yes, so that they don't get in a weird situation where they have to go to their wait list. And then some of those kids that they waitlisted have already said yes to other colleges, and it gets to be this strange give and take. And then they have a second, arguably more cynical reason for really caring, which is college rankings. Yield, which is the ratio of the number of kids that they offer admission to versus the number who accept that offer, is a big factor in college rankings. And like a lot of this stuff, yield wasn't meant to have this huge outsized impact on college admissions, but it is one of the few metrics in that process that colleges have a lot of control over. And so they try to influence it as much as they can, because that rankings game helps those selective colleges in a number of different areas, from how they're perceived in the media, how they're perceived by families, to research grants, to alumni giving, and just across the board, those rankings tend to help for better or for worse. So they do pay attention to that. Now, in order to entice families, this is how you can use that information to your advantage. In order to entice families to say yes when they offer admission, when you're above the typical threshold for academics at a given college, that's where they offer you merit-based scholarships. And so merit-based aid has nothing to do with need. Need-based scholarships are completely independent. So that merit-based aid at a school like USC, where they really try to entice their students with strong academic credentials, they've got a presidential scholarship that is half off tuition for 4 years, and then a trustee scholarship where basically attending USC is free for 4 years. And anyone who has looked at the price of USC recently knows that is worth a bloody fortune. Last thing on this slide, and I know there's a lot of data on this slide, but it is going to pay off through the rest of the presentation. Last thing on this slide is that this right here is the same student in terms of GPA in each of these three scenarios. The only thing that changed was their test score, right? And that drastically changes the way that school looks at that student. And here's why I'm going to emphasize that, because a lot of people tend to think of the SAT and the ACT as something that's going to take away opportunities from them. If you attend a school like CDM, that couldn't be further from the truth. There are colleges that are going to want a lot of colleges across the country that are going to want a very average student from a school like Corona Del Mar. Your SAT and ACT score, all they can do is enhance your profile, give you more options at selective colleges and more opportunities at these merit-based scholarships. And one of the things that is going to be particularly tricky for our seniors this year, in California, we've had a lot of test cancellations this year. Now, the majority of colleges have said for this admission cycle, for this current one, for the current seniors, we're going to be test optional, which means if you can't send us an SAT or an ACT score, we're still going to consider you for admission, and we're going to try to make it as fair as possible and give those kids a fair shake, and probably put a lot more emphasis on their GPA to make up for the lack of a test score. I think this is the right thing to do. They've done the right thing there, especially because a lot of our kids in California, we've suffered more test cancellations than the rest of the country. There have been thousands and tens of thousands of students who have tested on the SAT and the ACT over the last 3 months across the country, and they've done so safely, and it has been okay. But in California in particular, we have had an outsized number of cancellations, and so colleges, they have no choice but to be flexible and to give our kids a fair shake, because not all of them have been able to test, and not all of them will be able to test. And so that's a good decision on the part of the colleges. However, one oversight has been some of their scholarships, their merit-based scholarships, are still tied to SAT and ACT scores. I have heard from individual universities how they plan to address this, but the majority of them, I have not seen a public statement on how they intend to address that deficit for California students in particular. And so all this to say, if you are a senior, if you do see an opportunity to test and you think it might help you with those scholarships, or if the GPA is not what you want it to be for a particular selective college, and you go, oh, if only I could have earned that score that would have helped me at that school, there are still some opportunities to test. And there just were some other centers in California that posted that they will be testing in December. But again, those are all subject to cancellation. And we don't know exactly what will happen in December. I mean, the problem with all of this that's dealing with COVID and standardized testing so far is that it is very difficult to plan for any of these tests to happen. I mean, we've seen a number of families go out of state to Utah and Arizona, where there's more assurance that the exam that they schedule will be held and won't be canceled at the last moment. So it's a real challenge for our current seniors. And I know there were a lot of questions about that particular issue. And so we will. I do have a slide for the 12th graders, and we'll dig into it a little bit more. But the broad-based answer is you will still have options for college. The vast majority of colleges are going to make allowances for SAT and ACT, so it will be okay one way or another. If you happen to be in a position that you already have an SAT or an ACT score and it will help your application, there are a lot of signs that it will have a big impact on your chances at those schools, because again, just like with this chart, it gives the admissions officers, it makes it easier for them to say yes to you. And so that's the complicated, nuanced lay of the land for our current seniors. Okay, let's keep pushing through this. And then this is really just to wrap that up, which is that it is very important for our kids to think of the SAT and the ACT not so much as assessments, but as opportunities, because all they're going to do, and this is especially true for now our 11th and 10th graders, is that they're only going to open up doors for you coming from a great high school, like all of you do, to those selective colleges, to those merit-based scholarships. Okay, and then before we get into our grade by grade breakdown, I do want to mention this here, which is that I think there's a great piece of data that puts into context how the perception across the country of these tests has changed in a much healthier way, which is that in 2001, we saw 89 perfect scores in the ACT across the country, right? So just a handful of them. And from 2001 to 2016, the number of ACT test takers doubled. And so we would expect to see roughly 178 perfect scores on the ACT. Excuse me, yet in 2016, we actually saw 2,235 perfect scores. And what happened during this transition period, especially over the starting in right around the turn of 2010, 11, 12, we start to see that huge movement upwards in the number of perfect scores. And we're still talking a tiny fraction of the several million students who take the ACT. So it's not like a perfect score is common by any stretch of the imagination. I don't want you to take that away from the slide. What I do want you to take away from the slide is that we've seen this shift where families realized they were in much more control of this process of that SAT and ACT. Then they weren't just stuck with the score that they got, and some kids were naturally better at taking tests and some kids weren't, and it felt like an unfair process for those students that were just naturally better at taking an SAT or an ACT. And what we have now, and college admissions officers recognize this, is a much more healthy environment where they see those tests as rewarding hard work. And I'm I am happy to say that I was a part of that process in pushing that idea out there in the early days. That's actually how I got into this line of work, which was a research project. We were trying to prove that it was possible to study for the SAT and the ACT. That's how I ended up working on the test, studying past questions for the better part of a year, and accidentally inventing a new system to study for the SAT and the ACT, and I ended up with a perfect score on the SAT. And then we tried to take that out and show that data to colleges, to the testing agencies, and to families, and say, hey, wouldn't this be better if it was about hard work and the energy you put into something? Set a goal for yourself, work towards that goal. Aren't those the kids that we want to reward with the placement into selective colleges, rather than ones that just happen to naturally be good at an SAT or an ACT? Okay, what do I do next? So let's tackle grade by grade. And I did see that question there for a 12th grader. What should you do for ACT does not match your GPA? Should you submit it or not? What I would, for that question in particular, I don't want you to have to, I don't want to discuss your individual GPA and ACT score during this call. Somebody may figure out who submitted that question. I'm going to send you to, I'm going to send this out to everyone right now. If you go to that link that I just shared, and you can see it there on your screen, if you click this button right here, you can submit a question right here into that box. You could list all the specifics. Your information is secure, and you know no one else is going to run into it, and someone can give you some advice and some coaching, because this is the most nuanced, individualized year that I have ever seen in the history of college admissions. I mean, things are, there's so much in flux this year. And so what you really want to do is just talk to an individual that understands all those nuances, and they can help answer any of that stuff. And I think it's very important. We're more than happy to answer those questions, have our staff do it for free. It's just the least we can do, given how hard this year has been on our 12th graders. I mean, they are massively bearing the brunt of everything that, all the challenges that we are currently facing with all of this. And to any of my undergraduate, those the underclassmen, 11th graders, 10th graders, 9th graders, just be grateful that you're not in 12th grade right now, because it's going to be a lot more normalized and a lot easier for all of you in the subsequent admission cycles. All right, let's go grade by grade. We're going to start with the 9th graders because that's an easy one. 9th graders, or your parents, if you have some younger kids, here's what I want my 9th graders to do. Do well in school, of course. Work hard in your classes, but read for pleasure. That's the piece I want to add. Read for pleasure. I don't care what you read. Parents, please don't put any pressure on them to read the right thing. We just want to encourage them to read for pleasure. If it's Harry Potter, fine. If it's articles in The Economist, which happen to look and feel just like critical reading passages on the SAT and ACT, hey, that would be ideal, but it's by no means necessary. And the reason I mention this for the younger students and for everyone else, it's never too late to start reading for pleasure, but we see a number of things. We see these students, they do better in high school according to their grades. They report that they enjoy high school more. This is all just associated with reading for pleasure. The same thing happens in college. They enjoy college more. Their grades are stronger in college. And then as a side benefit, this is not nearly the most important piece, but as a side benefit, when those students reach 10th or 11th grade and they start preparing for an SAT or an ACT, the critical reading section of an SAT or an ACT, it is the most difficult section on which to improve your score. And the reason for that is ultimately people who teach these exams, they're trying to teach a student to read faster and for a higher level of retention while reading faster. It's a challenging skill to teach. It is teachable, it is learnable, but it takes time. The exception to that are kids who read for pleasure a lot. They pick up the skills very quickly and enjoy rapid success on that challenging section. And so that's one of those things that just in this little area of standardized testing, reading for pleasure is going to pay huge dividends in this area in a couple of years. Not to mention it's going to pay huge dividends across a spectrum of areas in your life. All right, let's keep going. And our 10th graders. All right, so here's what I want my 10th graders to do. By the end of this year, your main goal is just to decide between SAT or ACT. There is no college that requires both an SAT or an ACT. Every college will accept either an SAT or an ACT. I'm gonna say that again because I know that's a little bit complicated. There's no college that needs both an SAT and an ACT, and every college will accept either test. So it really behooves each individual student, just figure out which one you're a little bit naturally better at, and then run with that single exam. And my 10th graders, I want you to figure that out by the end of your 10th grade year. How do you do that? Okay, we've got a couple of ways of doing it. Normally we would say step 1 and step 2, you're gonna take either an ACT or a pre-ACT, an SAT or a PSAT, and then we would compare those scores using a chart like the one you have on your screen. Again, if you go to that free resources page, we have a more in-depth chart that you can use that gives you a bit more insight into your scores. There are a lot of challenges for students this year in getting access to various tests. Some people don't feel comfortable attending a PSAT event. All of these are valid concerns. We have solutions for that. All of it is free because CDM is one of the schools that we've worked with for several years and a number of families there, and I adore the head of your college counseling, and she does really great work. And so if you go to, again, that link is just www.prepgurus.com/contact. You can request a mock SAT, mock ACT, or one of each. Someone will email you back. They will set you up with links to an SAT and or an ACT if you need both to compare them. You can take them online, and you can do that with a proctor on a weekend where a member of our staff will walk everyone through the sections and make sure that the timing is just perfect. And if you have questions, they can answer it. They can answer those questions. Or you can do it 100% on your own. And if you know a little bit more about how these tests work, just click through the sections. It's timed. You'll get accurate scores because these are decommissioned former SAT and ACT exams. And then you'll receive detailed analyses of how you performed on each test and a comparison of which one is a better exam for you. So again, for my 10th graders, all I want to see is that, and you could do this now. If you, the one caveat to all this is you can do this anytime during 7th, 10th grade. You could do it right now online because I know a lot of kids have some free time right now. Take that SAT and that ACT near each other. That's the one thing I want to emphasize. If you take an SAT now in November and then you take the ACT in May, we can still compare those scores and make an adjustment, but it's not quite as accurate. So what I would recommend, take your SAT and your ACT now, or take both of them in the spring. Again, we're happy to do that for free for anyone who needs access to those exams. How many times do you take a mock SAT and an ACT? With us, we'll do one of each for free for anybody. Beyond that, we do reserve that for the clients that we're actively working with. But if you have a specific question along those lines, because I see one coming in the chat box, feel free to send it our way. We're doing everything we can for people in our community right now, and so we'll find a way to help you out if you need some help in that area. Okay, and then for my 11th graders, This is the normal chart I would walk you through to put together a plan. I say normal though, this year is anything but normal. And so I'm gonna make this really simple for my current juniors. Here are the steps. First of all, I know a number of you have not completed a mock SAT and ACT because we're hearing from these families quite a bit all of a sudden. They say, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm behind in the process. School got cut off last spring. We're trying to get our bearings this summer. We kind of forgot about all this standardized testing stuff. Your standardized test scores will matter, just like on that chart. That's why we spent so much time on it. They will matter by the time you're applying to colleges as a senior. And so we do want to take this process seriously. I wouldn't say that maybe you're a little bit behind in the process, but it's not that big of a deal. You just want to act now, which would be to take that mock SAT, mock ACT, get those scores compared, decide which one's a better path for you. That's a step you'd want to jump on right now. And again, we'll do that for free for anybody, and just to make sure everybody has the tools they need to succeed in this process at CDM. Beyond that, then we need to make some choices as 11th graders, and you may want to talk to your counselor about that. We're happy to talk to you about it. Some people have private counselors. You may want to talk to them about it. If anybody needs a recommendation for a private counselor that is trustworthy and will do right by you in that process, it's not a service that we provide, but we're more than happy to help families navigate that process and just say, hey, here's some good people you can trust. Not that you need them, because you have excellent counselors at CDM. I just know from past experience, some people, they feel like that's something that they have to have in addition to their excellent counselors. Our main concern, we don't want to see you go to someone that is not trustworthy. And I'll give you one example of how going to the wrong counselor can really affect things. Something that we're seeing right now with our 12th graders, there is a company out there, right? So they know a lot of colleges this year will be test optional for California students because a lot of our tests were canceled. Fair enough. They are giving their kids mock exams on the SAT or ACT, current seniors. They're handing out 33s, 34s, 35s, or near 1600 scores on the SAT on these practice tests for kids that can't actually score that high. Then they are advising those students to go to their college counselors at their high school and say, hey, can you please write a recommendation letter that says I was not allowed to test because my tests were canceled, but I have this practice test in hand that shows I could have scored a near perfect score on that SAT or ACT. And at first I heard about this and I thought, it was a high school counselor called me and said, hey, does this sound realistic to you? Because I have this kid's pre-ACT score and she went from a 13 to a 35. Is that even possible? It sounded fishy. When it happened again at another school and again at another school, and they all had a similar company involved, a similar advisor involved, we knew something was up with it. All I can say to any families who have heard this, I know of 3 individual high school counselors at different high schools that all figured it out. If they can figure it out, colleges can figure it out. Don't be tempted to cheat the system. We saw from the college admission scandal last year, it does not pay to fudge the facts. Trust in the process. Trust your college counselors. For you kids who've worked hard, it's going to work out just fine, and trust that your hard work is going to pay off in the end. All right, back to my 11th graders. We do need to figure out for the 11th graders, once you know if you're going SAT or ACT, if you choose to prep for the test. Some people do, some people don't. Now, we have a unique situation with the UCs and Cal States right now, in that they've said for this current admission cycle, they will not be considering SAT and ACT scores. Will that be the case next year? We don't know 100%. No one knows the answer to that for sure. There are plenty of people who will say they have the inside scoop and know for certain one way or the other. I think the honest answer is we certainly expect those schools to consider scores in the next year. That would be the logical next step for those schools. I have heard from admissions counselors at both of those systems that that's what they anticipate, but these decisions are made by very complicated political organizations, and so we will see when it comes to those two particular systems. For those juniors though and sophomores that are looking at this process in the bigger context, and they say, well, maybe I want to hedge my bets. Most students don't only apply to Cal States and UCs. It's usually one of those three tranches. That's one type of school that you apply to. You probably throw in a Cal State, throw in a UC or two, and then a couple of other types of schools. Again, for the majority of colleges, the SAT and the ACT will be a factor that is considered in the process. We do anticipate in-person testing in high schools, along with in-person schooling, will be happening again in the spring. And we can see that that's already happening with a number of schools here. I know I'm currently recording this from our Seal Beach location, where Los Alamitos High School, they've been open for nearly a month. They have not had many issues with their cases there. They have taken strong precautions, and as a result, they've been able to administer standardized tests on their campus. So we do think those will be returning without all the cancellations in the spring. If they don't, the testing agencies have also mentioned they are working very hard on an online option for the SAT and the ACT, just as a backup precautionary measure. And so again, there will be the option to test for any kids that want to, when we're talking 11th grade, 10th grade, 9th grade. Okay. All right, looking good. Yes, now at the UCs, it is complicated right now, and I could spend because there was Hannah asked a great question about the UCs, and they did set forth a policy that was different for in-state versus out-state. The plan was to move from test optional to eventually being test blind, only for California students, only for admission, but they did need test scores if they wanted to be considered for scholarships. I cannot believe that their policy will remain that convoluted and confusing, because we've already seen how much confusion a policy like that will create. And so again, they did say for in-state schools, next year, they were hoping to be test blind for admissions, and yet they would consider the scores for scholarships. That would be very difficult, because if the counselors, when they're looking at aid, have access to the scores, it's going to be hard not to consider scores in the process. Maybe they've got safeguards against that. They also said they were going to make their own test that would replace the SAT and the ACT. So as soon as that test is ready, they would be test blind to the SAT and the ACT, except there would be now a third standardized test that would be used for the UCs. Maybe they will go through with that. I'm trying to choose my words carefully. Maybe they will go through with that. I'm skeptical that they're going to just whip out a third standardized test, and that families won't be upset that they have to prep for an additional test just for this one system of colleges. But if I have learned anything this year, it's that we never know how things might change or what's coming up next. So all I can say is stay flexible. Go with what is most likely to happen, which is that the SAT and the ACT will play a role in your applications. If this new test pops up at some point in the future, we'll deal with that then. I promise I will be giving you the latest, most updated information on any webinars for CDM, and hopefully they'll be in person in the very near future. And so as you move through each grade in school, we'll have that latest information for you. All right, and then 12th grade, I think we answered all of this. I did the one thing that I would like to just repeat is that test optional is not the same as test blind. Test blind means the school will not look at SAT and ACT scores. Test optional means they will consider them, and so you want to make a choice if it makes sense to send that score, if it's going to enhance your application. We can't possibly talk through all the iterations that might take depending on certain scores. Talk to your counselors. Feel free to reach out to us as resources. We're here to help for your community. This company's headquarters are in Newport Beach, and so we're there. We're there to help the people in our community. That's what we want to do. All right, last thing, and I will get to, I'm gonna just double check my, okay, Q&A here, and then I will hit the last 2 slides. This is the last slide. Do I recommend taking SAT subject tests? For current seniors, I would say do not worry about subject tests. That should be the least of your concerns. I don't see colleges needing or wanting them, and so really should be focused on an SAT or an ACT if you can even take one, which you probably won't be able to. And again, that's going to be okay for our 12th graders. Yeah, the next question there, you've heard schools like Oregon and UW are also participating in not requiring scores. So, and I know I've said this a few times, but you can just see how these things become confusing. I think the best way to focus on this is for our 11th, 10th, 9th graders, know that things will be different next year than they are this year. We may not know exactly how they're going to be different, but they'll be different. It'll be more of a return to normal. So the majority of colleges, this current application cycle, they are going to be test optional, which means you do not have to send in a test score. For next year, we're going all the way around a year from now, and then a year after that. What we would expect is that SAT and ACT scores come back to play a much more prevalent role in the process, especially for our California kids, because we will once again be able to test. I don't know exactly what specific universities will choose to do for you current 11th graders, because all of those decisions have not been announced. There are some schools that have said, hey, we've got a 3-year plan, but plans change. I think we've certainly learned that this year. I know there will be changes to that UC plan. And so just take it 1 year at a time. Again, tune in for good information. And anyone that wants, actually, we're gonna get to that in a second. I can tell you how to get those updates right here at the very end. Oh yes, and I meant to get to this. So there were 2 questions beforehand, Superscoring and then being able to take individual sections of the ACT. Superscoring absolutely will continue to play a role this year. And so if you have test scores from 2 different dates, by all means, and different individual subject scores would combine for a higher total score. That's what a super score is. By all means, send those in. That will still help. Superscoring will play a strong role in the future. So it certainly matters for students that are in 10th and 11th and 9th grade. And then somebody asked here, will I be able to take a single section of the ACT like they had promised that you'd be able to this year? That is not the case. Those single sections of the ACT, they were only going to be available at a handful of schools that were delivering the test in a digital format to begin with. So that is not an option for this current school year. We'll see if that comes back next year. Okay, and I think all these other questions are either very individual or they have been answered already. And so again, you can submit any individual questions at that link I posted at prepgurus.com/contact. And then the last thought I want to leave you with, what is a good SAT or ACT score? Please remember, there are no good or bad SAT scores. There are only scores that will help you reach your goals. We want to take the mystique off of these tests and understand that they just measure fundamental skills in mathematics and the humanities. That's it. That's all they're designed to do. And they are teachable. You can learn how to perform better on the tests, and you're in control of this process. And then finally, if anybody needs this information, and then I'm going to round this thing off and say goodnight to everyone because we are at 7 o'clock. There is that link one more time, and we do have a new feature. So if you submit a question there, just fill out that form. We will send updates via email if you opt into that. And this is not it has nothing to do with marketing. This is just sending good information out. It uses your graduation year to make sure you get the right information at the right points in the process. And so as you near 12th grade, you get a reminder to fill out your FAFSA. That's the financial aid form. If we were in 11th grade, at the beginning of 11th grade, we might, I believe there's a reminder in there that says, hey, it's a good time to start talking to teachers you think you might 1 year from now want to ask for a recommendation letter, because you want to develop the relationships ahead of time with people you might ask for recommendation letters. You don't want to be that guy or girl who it's your application is due the next day and you're racing off an email that says, hey, remember me from 10th grade English? Could you write me a letter? And they don't remember who you are. You're not going to get a great letter that way. So a lot of this stuff, you want to be thinking about it ahead of time. And so we send these reminders out, short little reminders via email that will just help you stay ahead of the game throughout the process. All right, that's it. That's all I've got for tonight. Good luck to everyone out there. It was a pleasure talking to you. I hope the next time we get to do this, it is in person. And then, of course, we're here to help if anyone out there needs help when it comes to anything related to college admissions. All right, have a great night. Good night, everybody. Well, it's almost good night. We'll figure this out. Oh, thank you, and you are welcome. Good night.